Cost of living adjustment, also known as COLA, is a very interesting concept in total rewards management. But the underlying purpose of cost of living adjustment at any particular point in time is to be able to bring the employee's salary to a point at which it's able to compete with the going inflation rate. Let's start off by defining cost of living. According to investopedia.com, the cost of living is the amount needed to cover basic expenses such as housing, food, utility, and some other related one by an individual in a certain place and in a time period. Looking closely at this, it would mean that the cost of living is often used to compare how expensive it is to live in one city versus another. If I was staying in New York, my cost of living in terms of the basic expense that I need to incur will be completely different than if I'm living in Lagos or if I was living in Johannesburg. What that means is this: cost of living is a function of where you stay in terms of a certain place, in terms of a time period as well. The cost of living for any particular individual is tied to the wages or the salary that individual earns, and oftentimes this is affected by the prevailing inflation rate. This now brings to bear a very interesting conversation, which HR professionals and HR directors tend to ask me as a compensation and benefit expert. Shegun, I have an employee currently working in Accra, Ghana, and this employee is about to be taken to Lagos, Nigeria. Am I to increase that employee's salary because there's a change of location? Or another interesting conversation is because there is a prevailing inflationary rate that reduces the purchasing powers of employees within an organization. Organization often asks the question, how do we handle that inflationary rate in respect to the salaries we are paying their employees? Herein comes the missing link. It's called cost of living adjustment. According to an SHRM blog, a cost of living adjustment (COLA) is an increase in wages, salaries, or benefits, usually based on an objective measure that estimates how much additional money a typical person or household needs to maintain their standard of living. This particular standard of living is a function of the cost of living in the particular location and at a particular time, which means my standard of living if I was staying in New York would be completely different if I was staying in Lagos, Nigeria. As a matter of fact, if I was in London, my cost of living is slightly higher than when I'm outside of London as a city. What this means in essence is this: in managing the total reward management for your organization, you need to factor in the cost of living adjustment from time to time, because inflation would reduce the purchasing power or will reduce the income of your employees in terms of the salaries you give to your employees. What 100,000 can buy last year is not what 100,000 can buy this year due to inflationary changes. In simple terms, a cost of living adjustment is an increase in salaries or wages to counter inflation. Anytime we're talking about inflation, the consumer price index come to mind, and the consumer price index is a form of measuring the headline inflation within a particular country. What that means is this: organization needs to find a way to counter the effect on inflation on the salaries of employee, and that is where the cost of living adjustment come to answer that question. And most of the time, organization will factor in the cost of living adjustment as a salary increase within their total reward policy, which means they must be able to account for moving inflation over a year to year period. this is not the same as your normal merit pay or your normal salary increase. In order to be able to calculate the cost of living adjustment, you need to recognize that cost of living adjustment COLA is a form of salary increase, and it is usually the same percentage increase in salary that is applied to all employees regardless of their performance, because the whole idea of applying COLA is to counter the effect of inflation on the purchasing power of the income the employees are earning, in order to help them maintain their cost of living. The percentage increase is usually a factor of the prevailing consumer price index (CPI), which is talking about headline inflation. Or an organization can also choose to pick a percentage that is lower than the CPI, either higher or using the CPI figure. What that means is, if the inflation rate is say 17.75%, an organization can choose to adopt a COLA percent of 17.75% or lower, say 15%. Now, this particular percent will now be applied on every employee's salary. So the chosen percentage increase will then serve as the factor for multiplying each employee's salary across the entire organization. This means the organizational wage bill will move by the chosen percentage. Most of the time, organizations would take a decision to increase the salary of employees using the COLA percentage that they have agreed upon, which can be pegged at the consumer price index (CPI). That's the inflation, the headline inflation for the country, or it can also be a percentage either higher or lower, depending on the ability for the organization to pay that particular increase and even sustain it over a certain period. There are some other ways at which COLA can be applied to organization as a one-off percentage. So if I'm moving from one city to another, COLA can be applied to my salary to be able to help me cope with the current or the living expenses in the country or state that I'm moving into. What that means is that COLA can actually be applied in different ways to different organizations depending on their current situation and what they aim to achieve. But the underlying purpose of cost of living adjustment at any particular point in time is to be able to bring the employee's salary to a point at which it's able to compete with the going inflation rate.